Newt, you see this happening again, where we're coming up to another presidential election, and these legitimate concerns about voting fraud, and especially states where there's razor-thin margins last time around, and the left reflexively says, aha, you're trying to disenfranchise African Americans.
First of all, I think in your opening comments you had it basically right. Start with a simple premise. We do want to disenfranchise people who are dead. I mean, I think,
good point.
I know this is bold, this is out on the edge.
Yeah.
But I'm prepared to debate any Democrat anywhere in the country that once you're dead, you lose the right to vote. Now, I'm old enough. I remember when Chicago and South Texas both voted people who were dead, and John F. Kennedy won the election based on having stolen those two states, Texas and Illinois. And at the time, Republicans weren't prepared, partly because of the Cold War, they weren't prepared to make the kind of case they should have made. And there are counties in the United States that have more people registered than live in the county. And so you have an automatic case here. If you have more people registered than live in your county, probably a good number of them shouldn't be allowed to vote. And of course, the left, which passionately believes in rigging the election and passionately believes that it cannot win if it's not allowed to cheat. So the left goes crazy over this idea that we're actually going to insist that, for example, that only people who are alive should vote. Now, again, it's bold, it's out on the edge, but I'm prepared to defend the proposition that only people who are alive should be allowed to vote. Then we can work from there to only American citizens, and you should only be allowed to vote once. I mean, there are a couple of these steps you can take in the debate, but I'd like to start with the first one being that if you have more people in your county registered than live in your county, there's something profoundly wrong.
Newt, there's another issue, and it's one that to me is all too predictable. And Bill Gertz has a great piece about this a couple weeks ago. China's covert attempts to subvert Trump's reelection. I mean, China obviously wants someone who's not going to rock the boat like Trump did. They want to go back to the way it was before, where they just are on the slow march to global domination, and they basically take Taiwan and maybe even move into other parts of Asia, and then cement the deals in Africa and South America and keep a pace. But apparently there's China's conducting an aggressive disinformation and influence campaign designed to block the reelection of President Trump. According to Bill Gertz, who did an enormous amount of research on this. And meanwhile, they're still stuck on the Russian narrative over there at MSNBC.
The Republicans, for the most part, don't like the theory that Donald Trump is beholden to Russia. And Trump apologists in the media get very angry whenever anybody suggests that and start pushing back. And it's the anti-Trumpism that they've hidden behind for years to keep their subscription rates up or to try to just stay afloat. I do wonder at the end of this week, what is the Republican explanation for a president who has ceded Afghanistan now and said, go in, take over, we'll get out? And the fact that he's doing nothing to protect American democracy. What is their explanation? If they don't like that Donald Trump is on the take or he's being blackmailed by Vladimir Putin, and there has been no evidence of that, what's their explanation?
Well, look, I mean, they're not going to mind the Chinese breaking in to defeat Trump because that is a moral and virtuous position. Whereas if the Russians were trying to beat Hillary, that was a sign of enormous danger to America. And I think you have to recognize how much of this is situational. These people hate Trump so deeply that they become unhinged. And that's a great deal of what's going on. And the news media, it's almost like they can't think because they become so enraged and so focused on the existence of Trump that whatever their normal cognitive process is disappears.
And by the way, apparently, according to this real estate tycoon who's exiled from China, he said that the campaign within China to affect the American election has been underway since the 2018 midterms. And it basically involves, Newt, enlisting Chinese elements here in the United States. And they've been working through the universities, working through the high-tech industry, and that this is going to be widespread, yet, of course, not really reported on. I mean, he goes into great detail about conversations that were actually took place with the vice premier of China, Vice President Wang Qishan in Beijing. That's where the initial meetings on this took place.
Yeah, I've been working on a book on China, which will come out in October.
Oh, good.
And it's amazing to me the depth of penetration of the Chinese in many of our campuses. And two of the senators, Senator Rubio and Senator Cruz, have done real work on trying to get us to recognize that we're going to have to adopt a whole new set of rules to deal with just how really bad the situation is in trying to deal with Chinese institutions that come in the U.S. for the specific purpose of subverting us. I mean, this is a genuine Cold War in precisely the manner of the campaign with the Soviet Union. And people don't want to recognize how real and how serious this is.
Newt, I want to move into what's happening in the presidential election, because I always like to see where the betting sites are. The betting sites are favoring, right at this moment, Elizabeth Warren to be the nominee. And it seems to be this sense of the inevitable collapse of Joe Biden. They've been kind of cheering this on for some time, this narrative, and he's still pretty much the same, even a little higher than he was in June in the overall standings. But I guess we know from recent experience where you stand today in the Democrat Party doesn't mean you're going to actually be the nominee when it all is said and done.
Yeah, Hillary was, I think, 30 points ahead of Obama nationally just before Obama won the Iowa caucuses. So you can't know it. Let me confess up front for all of our listeners, though, that I was just wrong. I thought Kamala Harris had the best opportunity to become the nominee. And I didn't realize when Willie Brown, who was her mentor and had apparently a relationship with her. Brown is one of the smartest politicians in America, former Speaker of the Assembly in California. Mm-hmm. And when he wrote a piece in San Francisco saying, look, she just can't make it, basically saying she can't hit major league pitching, and she's in the end just not going to be there. I underestimated how real that was, and she's had a terrible couple of weeks. And in the process, Elizabeth Warren has put together a pretty impressive campaign. Now, I also agree with the way you just said. The way you said was one of the interesting challenges we have. I mean, everybody thinks that Biden can't make it, except Biden isn't particularly falling apart. So you have to ask yourself, if we're all so clever and we all know he won't make it, how come he's still slugging away and, moving forward and he's still viable? It's a puzzling moment, I think. Well, you can't assume automatically we understand.
I said on Monday night's Ingram Angle that it's a Hillary 2.0. This is a redux of Hillary in many ways. He's the more establishment candidate. He's being pushed in this case mostly by his wife, I think, who seems very a driving force behind running. Obama didn't even want him to run, apparently. Obama's like, Joe, you don't have to do this, man. You don't have to run, Joe. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So it's a tacit way of saying don't run. And meanwhile, there's not a big enthusiasm for Biden, except when you compare him to the other candidates who are also, there's no one. No, I mean, other than Warren, I guess, and Sanders is just, I don't see him getting it, but. There's just not a lot of enthusiasm for Biden, and there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm for Hillary. Their crowds are meager and slim, and None of the young people seem to be thrilled about it, and there you are. That's where we are.
I thought that Sanders really hurt himself in the second debate because he looked angry and unapproachable, and kind of like he was a one-trick pony who could just yell at people. And in the long run, people don't vote for a potential president who is hostile to the very people that are supposed to be electing them. And I thought it was a very strange performance, and he's dropped about 12 or 14 points, and I don't see him recovering because there's no natural reason for it. On the other hand, it was very funny. Apparently 2 or 3 days ago, Biden's in some crowd and he's going, "I'm having bigger crowds than everybody. I mean, have any of you seen anyone have a bigger crowd?" And about 2/3 people in the room said yes. I think we actually have seen a lot of other people have bigger crowds. And he didn't know what to say at that point. It sort of blew his whole argument.
What would you say to President Trump? I know you talk to him, I'm sure, quite regularly, but he's 73 years old, and he has great political instincts. He also swings at every pitch. If I were he, I wouldn't elevate people like Scaramucci, or I wouldn't even mention. I mean, these people are just irrelevant. Yet he does seem to want to.
He doesn't just swing at every pitch. When he gets bored, he throws balls up in the air and just hits them.
Yeah, that's true.
It's kind of like he doesn't like quiet, so he's constantly making noise.
But do you think the American people are wearying of this? I mean, his numbers aren't where they should be for an economy as this strong. They're just not. He should be up at 60% approval.
Ironically, his numbers are about where Obama was, and I think about where Reagan was. But he has much more opposition that's hardened. And I think that frankly, if he picked fewer fights, he would probably see his numbers get better. I do think people just get tired of it. They get to a point of going, okay, do we really have to fight over Greenland? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I think especially for suburban women, he did pretty well with the women vote last time around, but you just get the sense that you need more happy warrior and less, cantankerous warrior. So I think you need the tough fighter, but a happy warrior. Everyone knows he's tough and he can fight, but the positive, happy America's going to be even greater. Keep making America great, or make America greater. I think MAG is better than Keep America Great. I like MAG, but I don't know. I just get this feeling that he really isn't content unless he's in some brawl with an irrelevant person like Joe Scarborough. I mean, Joe Scarborough, who cares? I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, but I just I've been saying this for years, and then he won the presidential election. But I think things are.
But of course, part of it is a strategy of total information dominance. I mean, he takes all the oxygen out of the room. Nobody else can get hurt. And so in that sense, I think he's probably fairly content that, it sustains his celebrity status. People show up at his huge crowds, and he gets some sense of security that he must be doing something right. I think what undercuts him is that all of the noise makes it harder to get across how many really good things are going on. You may have noticed today the number of people applying for unemployment benefits went down. After all this talk about a recession, the fact is that we have more job openings than we have people looking for work. Now, that's a happy thing. It's a positive thing. And I think sometimes you never get around to seeing that because we're in the middle of all these other fights.
Right, and I think that's what the left wants us to be, because otherwise people feel pretty happy and confident and optimistic, and they can't have that. So the left is in the unenviable position, I believe, of having a very dark vision of America. For all their talk of peace, love, and understanding, they're incredibly negative people. Trump seems to be having a good time most of the time. Sometimes he gets ticked off, and that's fine. But that's what I think. I just think the happy, positive, this is our future, and we're going to grab it, and we're going to take this mountain, and we're going to take the next. I just think people want to be on that ride. They don't want to be on the pessimistic, dark vision of America ride, and that's where I think Trump has the edge.
Well, I think historically, people who are optimists have always had a big advantage in America. We tend to elect presidents who are optimists. We tend to think that the future can be better. We're always looking for, a better place to live, a better car, a better job. We're actually a very forward-looking, optimistic people overall. And the left is exactly the opposite. And the left has this passionate need to somehow see the world as terrible, and we're all bad people. And I think most Americans don't believe that.
And Newt, this entire dynamic where Trump comes in and does a lot of what he said he would do. I mean, we have a ridiculous budget deficit and a ridiculous debt that I'm frankly really disappointed the Republicans are not trying to deal with. I presume they'll deal with it in the second Trump term, but they're certainly spending a lot of money that we don't have. But he's done a lot that he said he was going to do, and I think that drives the left crazy. And he has driven people who used to be somewhat reasonable on occasion, and even esteemed historians like John Meacham, into apoplexy. Let's listen.
Russia is trying to undermine American democracy, Mr. President. Do something about it. And yet this president refused to do anything about it. What type of picture does it paint?
As gloomy as at any point in the history of the country in terms of a president's conduct of our policy toward a foe and or a rival. I don't remember a president who seemed as so clearly a willing agent of a foreign government.
That just takes my breath away, Newt. That's John Meacham, who I've known for decades. That's really what a historian thinks has happened. Okay.
No, but of course Meacham's a liberal, and so Meacham has a challenge that he has to pay. He is of that world. Those are the people he goes to cocktail parties with. They all believe this.
An agent of Russia? They're still on that? Russia size the economy of what, France? Meanwhile, China has 1 billion plus people, and they're moving into every sector of global economics and manufacturing and development and research, and they just sleep through that conversation. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, but that's because you are not of the true faith. If you were a true left winger, you would understand that you have an obligation. That this is absolutely what we have to believe, and that if we don't believe that, we're not good people.
It's. I've got to say, it takes my breath away. I don't think he was as left wing as he's become under Trump. Trump has forced. I mean, I think he smoked them all out. They were always like that. You're right. They were always like that, but they hit it better. Now he's just smoked them all out on being open borders.
And collectively, remember, they've collectively also gone to the left, so that the pressures to go with them to repeat this nonsense because it's who we are. It's what we have to believe this, otherwise we don't belong to the club. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of what this is all about. That they're really compelled psychologically to believe all this.
Newt, recession. The Russia, racism, and recession. The 3 R's. This is the Democrats' entire, I think, playbook, and they really, as you could hear from that soundbite we just played, they haven't dropped Russia. They're still, of course, on racism, and I heard your comments the other day about that New York Times 1619 project, but they're really banking on and hoping for recession.
What we are seeing is that the proverbial chickens are coming home to roost. Donald Trump inherited a great economy from Barack Obama, one that was steadily growing. And everybody remembers the doldrums, the pits that Barack Obama lifted the economy up from. But now you have a tax scam for the top 1%. You have tariffs, which are bad for our farmers, bad for our businesses, bad for our manufacturers, bad for our retailers. And so, yes, I mean, what he's done is he's implemented his own policies and he screwed up Barack Obama's good economy. Thank you, Donald Trump.
First of all, flatlining wages, anemic GDP growth, still ridiculous upside-down numbers on labor force participation. A lot of people just gave up looking for work. Manufacturing jobs grew at a snail's pace because of all the ridiculous trade deals. And that yet this is where they are. So he inherited a great, robust economy from Obama. Yeah, there was some expansion, but it was nowhere near what other economic expansions and recoveries had ever been.
Well, look, I think that's part of the challenge to the left is that we're now in year 3 of a Trump economy, which has been more robust. And ironically, from the standpoint of liberals, the group which has had the largest increase in wages are the bottom 1/4 of the country. So the Trump prosperity is actually affecting people who historically liberals claim to care about. And I think you now have, when you have 7 million job openings and only 6 million people looking for work, you really have a pressure to go out and hire folks and to pay them more. And that's what's happening all over the country. And so they're desperate for a recession. I don't think they're going to get one. I think that the economy will keep growing because the underlying fundamentals are very, very powerful. And we are today the healthiest economy in the world. I mean, if you look at what's happening in places like Germany or France or Italy, it's astonishing how much better off we are.
And Newt, we couldn't let you go before your commenting on the use of this New York Times project to influence young people in schools. The Pulitzer group has partnered up with the New York Times and is offering copies of the 1619 Project to schools across America, and I guess they're printing thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. And you've always said this: you lose the historical record and the telling of history, and you lose the youth. Tell us what we need to know about this.
Well, I think, and I'm actually going to write about this starting with my newsletter tomorrow. And my title is going to be 1619 or 1776. Which of these two dates defines the real America? And the objective fact is that the entire planet had slavery. The place that began to break down was America, and in fact there were colonies that were outlawing slavery even before the American Revolution. And the centerpiece of freedom on the planet is not so, again, I do think you have to take slavery very seriously. You have to recognize its impact on the black community. You have to recognize how illegitimate it was and that it was, in fact, a terrible institution. And that's part of what happened in the Civil War. But I also try to point out to people, there were 400,000 northern whites who died liberating the slaves. So to have it purely as the centerpiece of American history is slavery is, I think, profoundly false. Slavery is very important. It's worthy of being studied. There are a lot of other things worthy of being studied. And certainly if you were African American, you could make the argument that from your standpoint and your community, it was the central factor that shaped several hundred years. But on the other hand, what ultimately has liberated us is a group of people in 1776 and 1789 who invented a form of self-government and the rule of law, which has stood the test of time and which has allowed us to extend, and even in their first documents, they were beginning to find ways to gradually get rid of slavery. And that was a much more bold and radical position at the time than people want to recognize today.
Dinesh made the point yesterday that there were so many untruths or misrepresentations and omissions in this New York Times piece because it was done in an effort to frame not just history but Trump. And so there was no mention of Booker T. Washington, There was no mention really of the framers who were adamantly against slavery. Even those whose family owned slaves were looking for a way, as you said, to get rid of it. But in 1619, Dinesh said there were about, I think, 20 or 30 slaves in the United States, as far as they could count. That was not the driving force of America.
The first shipload to arrive in 1619 had 20 slaves, and you would have to argue that slavery was a significant institution. It had a significant role, particularly in the South, but it was never the defining or dominant institution
of America.
In America.
Right.
The left will refuse to get into an argument in which you look at pre-European slavery in the Americas, and you look at pre-European slavery in Africa and the Middle East, and the degree to which slavery around the world was not a particularly white phenomenon. It was a global institution, and very often it was local people who were enslaving other local people and then selling them. Now, that's not a topic that the left will even begin to talk about, because their goal is to create a history which condemns America.
Yeah, so that's why they have to say it's America's institution. No, it was when the founding of this country, when we declared our independence from Britain, we established the framework that would ultimately lead to the abolishing of slavery, abolition of slavery. But it has to be all about America in order to ultimately, I think what they want to do is jettison the Constitution. I think they want to get rid of all these documents, Newt. Is that too off the wall to say? That to me, that's where this is all going.
I think there's a lot to it. I just finished rereading Theodore White's Making the President in 1972, and it is eerie how many of these themes go back into the McGovern campaign and the left-wing radicals in the late 60s. And they've just been growing in strength on the college campuses and in the newsrooms. But they're all the same things. You had people in the McGovern movement who wanted to abolish the Constitution back then. Mm-hmm. Because, again, there's this very deep left-wing hostility to America. They see America as a bad place.
And AOC says the other day that the Electoral College is racist. Oh, my God. Electoral College is the one that kept the northern states having equal representation in the Senate with the bigger southern states. This is you don't even know basic history, and you're out there being quoted by legitimate journalists. Crazy.
Well, of course. Look, AOC is a tribute to the rise of the Kardashian culture, in which celebrity status is more important than facts.
Mm-hmm. Well,